Hi, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. It is a great pleasure to see so many people on this webcast, on this webinar. This is the first of a series of webinars that TPI is producing alongside some of its partners, including, in this case, with World Vision and with UNDESA. Before I ask our colleague Ola from UNDESA to sort of introduce the webinar, just a little bit about the partnering initiative itself. We are an international NGO specializing in driving effective collaboration for sustainable development. And we work on a whole range of different areas, from international policy through supporting the development of partnerships, through helping organizations become institutionally fit for partnering, but also very much around the theory and practice of collaboration. And those of you who know us, you will know that on our website, there are a whole series of tools and guidance around partnering and the partnering process. This webinar is very specifically around one aspect of partnering, around how partnerships themselves are able to generate additional value, have the alchemy of partnerships by bringing together the resources of organizations. How are we able to deliver more? How is it more than the sum of its parts? I'd like to ask our colleague Ola from UNDESA to sort of introduce the overall topic.
My name is Ola. I work in Division for Sustainable Development Goals of the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. And we're very pleased to be joining this webinar. And of course, we are talking about partnerships, how to strengthen partnerships, how to develop them, and how to find the best value in partnering. Of course, this is a very key element to driving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development forward, which, of course, as we all know, I don't have to repeat that, I think that would really require all hands on deck. Different actors, different sectors working together really in an integrated manner, pooling knowledge, financial resources, and expertise together. So, of course, cross-sectorial and innovative multi-stakeholder partnerships is a very crucial role for this in getting us where we want by 2030. And just a little bit on the role of DESA and our division on partnerships. So DESA is the UN department in the Secretariat that coordinates intergovernmental processes related to the follow-up and implementation of the 2030 Agenda. And in this capacity, we also serve as, if I can say so myself, sort of partnership data expert, gathering information to measure and monitor partnerships broadly, and also providing opportunities for sharing knowledge, identifying partnership best practices, and also this important element of building capacity of various stakeholders. And we do this through a variety of annual meetings, policy dialogues, analytical product development, online platforms, and various capacity building initiatives. And of course, the development of this guidebook is part of our ongoing work together with TPI.
Ola, thank you very much indeed for giving a great introduction. Clearly, collaboration and partnerships is essential as part of delivering the SDGs. The UN is one of the key players to this. One of the challenges that you presented was the degree to which partnerships are really delivering. We spend a lot of time and effort with these partnerships, but are they effective? And this is one of the things that we with World Vision and with UNDESA have been looking at, is can we create a framework to be able to both plan partnerships and see if partnerships are effective at delivering more. We have limited resources in the world. We need to bring them together in order to really maximize the value. But how do we do that? And that's kind of the holy grail of partnering, and it's something that we have been looking at and have developed this guidebook that we are now introducing here. So I'm going to just give a few slides to give you an idea of this framework for value creation and something about the tools. And then we have colleagues from World Vision, from the company Pearson, and from Unicef, who will be talking about their examples of partnerships and how they are creating value. We'll then have a discussion amongst the participants and the panel. to really then further explore this idea of value creation. So before we get going, I think one of the things that it's really sort of important to understand is there are different types of partnership. We use the word to mean pretty much any type of relationship, but when we're looking at how partnerships create value, then we need to unpick this a little bit. And so here we have a framework that's quite helpful. We find where partnerships at level 1, this is this idea of exchange partnerships, that you might, for example, have a business might be donating staff time or funding to an NGO or UN agency, and in return that business might get some reputational benefits or some employee engagement benefits, for example. It's this sort of clear sort of exchange between them. Then this next level is around really combining and integrating the resources we have. How do we combine the resources, again, for example, of business with NGOs to deliver something more than sum of the parts? So how do we take, for example, Barclays Bank and their experiences of banking, and Care and Plan International and their experience and knowledge of working with communities, and combine those two together in order to create micro banking for the poor in rural areas in East Africa. And so that's where this value creation, you can begin to see this value creation happening through this combination of resources. And then finally, we talk about the third level, which is much more about transformation of societies by having all sectors, all players within a particular area, particular value chain, or a particular system, who together can align the way they work and operate and collaborate to really transform a system and how it works and operates. So when we look at these different types of partnership, we can also sort of begin to see where this value is being created. And you can sort of see these different levels where the benefits or the value that is delivered within, it could be affecting the partners themselves, and that's kind of a leverage exchange type partnerships where each partner benefits from it. Then you can have the impact on I have beneficiaries in inverted commas, those that are sort of impacted or benefit more widely from a partnership, and that can be sort of particularly from these combined or integrate type partnerships. And then, of course, the system shift, where multiple different actors, because you're changing the rules of the game, you're transforming a system in some way. But let's get a little bit more concrete about that, because the way that we look at partnerships is that they have to do two things. Firstly, they have to deliver value to all of the partners involved. And secondly, we hope that the partnership itself is creating significantly more value. We want that partnerships, that 1 + 1 equals 5. We know that partnering is difficult, it takes time and effort, so we need to ensure that genuinely by combining our resources together, we are able to create additional value. So if we just have a quick look, because we find that often partners or individual organizations are really not sufficiently assessing the value creation or the benefits to them. And so together with, in fact, it was originally with both UNICEF and WFP, we've developed this framework where organizations can capture the value they're getting. So that's both in terms of the mission value, are we achieving our strategic objectives through this partnership, but then also the organizational value that they are gaining. And that could be, in some cases, it could be funding, but also there are additional value that can be gained through increasing reputation, the improved political or social capital, technology transfer, capacity building, all of these different areas where partners, organizations can gain significant value in addition to achieving their mission. And of course, this is so important that organizations, when going into a partnership, assess this, because then they can see, well, what are the costs involved in being involved in this partnership, and this value we're getting out of it, is that worth it? The second element, as I said, is about this holy grail about the value out of partnership. And this is where we have sort of defined a couple of terms that we think are going to be helpful as we take this whole area forward. The first one is collaborative advantage. and that is the intrinsic value, the intrinsic power that bringing together resources, particularly from different sectors, can create. And then the output of that is what we're calling the partnership delta. That is the difference that a partnership bringing together players can deliver in comparison to traditional single actor outcomes. So that really is trying to determine what is greater than the sum of the parts in terms of the impact it has. That's the partnership delta. What do these look like? Well, when it comes to sort of collaborative advantage value types, we have come up with a set of 10 reasonably distinct areas in which partnerships create or have the potential to create additional value. And you can see these here. And I'm just going to talk about, just mention 2 or 3 of them just to give you an idea. And then the partnerships that will be presented shortly will then be able to illustrate more of them in a moment. So let's just take number 1. Partnerships, the collaborative advantage is bringing together of complementary resources of all different kinds. And what that does is, in terms of the impact, the extra impact it can have, it can create complete solutions that would just be impossible without each of these key jigsaw puzzle pieces that are required to make that whole solution. But also, we talked earlier about potentially to transform a system, that we all bring sort of key parts of that puzzle. But also we can create more sustainable solutions because we are bringing in economic actors as well as social actors and environmental actors. Another example of collaborative advantage is about being able to share risks by bringing in multiple partners. And that can result in this delta P, this difference that a partnership makes of being able to deliver something at potentially much greater scale, far greater scale than any one organization would be able to do on its own, whether that's shared risks in investment or shared risks of implementation that NGOs might have in delivering a major program. That sharing of risk can result in this significant additional value that's being created. And you can sort of look through these different approaches, and you can see that in multiple different ways. For example, partnerships can create sufficient weight of action. By bringing together different partners, you can create a critical mass that can deliver something that would not be possible otherwise. So it could be around advocacy, and clearly the stronger the voices, the greater the weight behind it, the more likely you're able to deliver your advocacy targets. So all in all, what we're trying to do here is create a much more systematic way to think about how partnerships can create value in order to then really focus and concentrate on that value creation. So in practice, this might look like, in the early days at the beginnings of the partnership development, it could be literally sitting down with your partner with these lists, this list of different ways partnerships can create value in order to really maximize value creation. So really looking at that collaborative advantage and then trying to say, well, what is that delta P that we are hoping for, that we are going to be working towards, and understand what the key building blocks are to get there. And really importantly, understanding measures of success early on. We hear all the time people asking for indicators for partnership impact. And of course, partnerships are no different to other programs and projects. They have certain impacts that they have, which can be measured in traditional means. But what we're looking at here is how do you both pre-assess and work towards and then measure the actual additional impact that partnerships can create. And you can do that in the tracking stages while the partnership's implementing, and of course at the end as you are evaluating your partnerships. So that was just a little bit of theory to get us going, and I'm going to ask Ian from World Vision to talk a little bit about his experiences, or the experiences of particular partnerships that World Vision is involved in around its It Takes a World campaign. Over to you, Ian.
Excellent, thank you, Darian, and hi everybody. Yeah, we've been very engaged in trying to understand how we can use this collaborative advantage framework for indeed that delta P. So I'm just going to share why and how we're using the approach and some early findings. Now, I think it's fair enough to say that these 10 elements are very emergent. They reflect the practice that we've seen over previous years, so they're not too unexpected, but there's certainly room for refinement. So my team's been consulting to our field offices over the past year or so on challenges and opportunities for partnership, and one driver we keep finding is the need to demonstrate the value of partnerships. As an organisation, we're serious about collaborating for greater impact, for achieving more sustained change, and of course to meet our contributions and commitments to the SDGs, particularly SDG 17, and the others that we contribute to, and the Grand Bargain and World Humanitarian Summit. Now, our leaders and staff consistently resonate with the need to move from transactional partnerships, essentially where very often you talk about it being a partnership, but you end up being either a recipient or maybe a subgrantor. And the need for our partnerships there to guarantee value for any partner beyond the financial transaction. We've got some good examples we've been identifying, and we're seeking to build on these and in turn improve the partnerships we have. Overall, it means that World Vision's offices need to become much more co-creators if we're going this approach. And that means that conversations have to take place in ways that staff may not always be used to. There's more to negotiate. They may have less control. As such, we face the need to help partners and colleagues to review and consider the value of their partnerships. We don't want people just going back to the lowest common denominator of transactional relationships. And so we see this framework being very, very valuable for that. Darian started with the organizational benefit tool, looking at mission benefit and organizational benefits. That's critical for better and more creative negotiations, help to move from just a value for money negotiation to a much more value creating long-term negotiation. So whilst we're focusing here on the collaborative advantage framework, I do think that other tool is absolutely critical, and not just for us but for any partner that we are working with. And then the second, this collaborative advantage framework, we've used it in a couple of ways. First, as a thought experiment tool for staff to consider partnerships they have and ways that they can be improved. And people find that very useful to begin to negotiate partnerships. And then what I want to share a little bit about is we retrospectively applied the framework to partnering in the campaign work that we're doing at the moment. Next slide, please. Many of World Vision's offices have launched a campaign around ending violence against children. As you can see, it has a slogan, "It takes a world," which kind of implies a collaborative approach. And we wanted to explore how is this collaborative approach really working. The case studies were from the 3 countries that you can see mentioned. We also did training for partners from across government, civil society, and other organisations in Swaziland as it was, Eswatini as it is now, and Lesotho. The 4 that we see, and I'm going to unpack now, are you will not be hugely surprised about. One might expect an advocacy campaign, next please, to focus on the weight of action, and interestingly we saw 3 other areas coming out strongly. So here, creating sufficient weight of action is one of those 10 elements of the collaborative framework, and you can simply see this nice little testimony at the top from Save the Children in Amaya, that the ministry was willing to be challenged and to push through in a way that it wouldn't with any one organisation. Similarly in Eswatini, that they actually managed to pass a new act based on what was happening. So the sufficient weight of action, a classic advocacy partnering approach. Next slide, please. We also saw a lot of interesting examples here about bringing together essential complementary resources and instruments. And I think this is a classic of that kind of type 2 partnership in the middle of the slide that we saw a few minutes ago. It allows coordination and co-creation. It was amazing in the case studies, the number of resources that were brought together by different partners from across all sectors, including business groups. And you can see, interestingly, this quote at the bottom I included from the Ministry of Social Development in Lesotho, how they saw that aligning and understanding all the different resources hugely enabled coordination and the sense that there was an ability to develop things together. Next, please. Then another element, and I think this is a key application of the collaborative advantage framework, is this understanding the different actors and their the way that they can make a difference to a partnership. So this example highlighted from Amaya at the top, the reaching a jointly agreed problem with very careful engagement, right to the engagement of children affected by abuse and their families. And similarly then in Eswatini, the ability to reach into the community and make sure that their voices then are included and they are able to speak through the campaigns. And then the fourth we saw, next slide please, yes, the collective learning and capacity or capability building that is happening. And we see some great examples of that around social accountability, child protection. Nice quote there from the police in Lesotho. The partnership might come to an end, but it's not a short-term project for us. We're really focused on child protection and we'll continue with the skills that we have. So I think it's interesting by the different collaborations and partnerships across those campaigns. And I just want to mention one of the interesting things that we had to do is learn how to brand it so that it wasn't just a World Vision campaign. And that was just fine, and I think very key to get the engagement and commitment of all those resources. I think we are beginning to see ways that we first see system shift. That was all the alignment, and we begin to understand what that is. So Darian earlier showed us all the arrows aligning, and we begin to see how that begins to look in practice. And overall, we begin to explore how we maximize that delta P. The delta P is not, we can't do arithmetic. We know 1 + 1 does not equal 5, but we are able to do things that are both usual and unusual. Thinking about what combination of a given combination of partners can best achieve, but it also helped people to think about what new partners they should bring in, and also what new approaches the different collaborations and partnerships could do. And I think also there's a simple thing that it gives partnerships a reality check on what they maybe can't do with an existing group, and where they would either need to be more realistic about their ambitions or do more. So in the future, I think we hope to use this tool so we can do these 4 things, that we can contribute to our portfolio management, that we can enhance the partnerships that are there either by doing less or seeking new ways to maximize the resources, that we can cut on transaction costs because people know what they're doing, and overall generate more sustainable outcomes, because by using this framework, we're not just caring about the direct short-term outcomes, but we're also looking at some of the more indirect long-term outcomes, and so greater contributions to sustainable change. So I hope that's helpful, and I'm looking forward to the next 2 contributions and any questions and ideas, yeah, and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian. And one of the things that our colleagues at Care International told us was that what they find useful is actually having this as a cheat sheet when they are negotiating partnerships with other organizations, because what they found is that they haven't had a way to quickly zoom in on the areas where there's real potential for value creation, and this has sort of just helped to frame those conversations. So let's have another example. And Amanda Gardiner from Pearson, and Amanda is also one of the trustees of the Partner Initiative. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about your experience with Save the Children.
First of all, let me just say thank you, Darian, and to your colleagues at TPI for asking me to participate today. One of my favorite subjects is partnership. For those of you who don't know Pearson, maybe I'll just say a little bit of, give a little bit of an introduction about the company. We are one of the largest education companies in the world. I lead sustainability and social innovation at Pearson, and what we do is develop products and services that we really sell across all ages and stages of the education system. Those products include things like textbooks, tests, curriculum materials, online education programs, and teacher training services. And like many other organizations, including the organizations that you represent, we are increasingly moving from a kind of paper-based analog systems and products to technology-driven products and systems. And so that's a huge change for us. Since about 2015, we have been working in partnership with Save the Children on an initiative that we call Every Child Learning. And the focus of that partnership is really to innovate new solutions for delivering education to kids who are affected by emergencies and in conflict-affected settings. Kids whose education has been interrupted or disrupted in some way. And so in terms of the collaborative advantage framework that Darian was just talking about, this is really sitting squarely under number 3, where we are combining resources and capabilities with Save the Children and others to create more effective approaches to the challenge of refugee education in particular. The partnership is being implemented initially, at least in Jordan. And if you don't know, I think most people know by now, Jordan has been severely impacted by the ongoing crisis in Syria and the massive influx of Syrian refugees to the country. About 1 in 5 people in Jordan is now a Syrian refugee, which is incredible. And the huge number of refugees have created stresses and strains on public systems, including the education system. And just to give you an example, in 2015 to 2016, there was an 875% increase of Syrian children enrolled in public schools. So that's massive. In these types of conditions, many Syrian children, and particularly boys around the ages of 9 to 12, end up dropping out of school for various reasons, because they have trouble learning in overcrowded classrooms, because they're being bullied, there's lots of cultural tension, or because the family expectation is that they leave school and they actually go out and find work to support families. So with Save the Children, we wanted to try and address what is a very complex set of challenges and to really find an innovative and new way to keep kids in school and learning where they should be. And so that's really the background for the partnership. And we could have just worked with Save, who have a number of education programs around the world, to adapt a program that they've already been implementing. But, well, actually, in fact, we did have loads of other offers from different organizations, from different companies, for everything from free materials to free mobile phones to free computers, free school building kits, everything you can think of. But this is really quite a unique situation and quite a unique refugee situation. And we first really wanted to understand what are the specific challenges in this context that these kids have been facing, and how can we develop a solution that addresses those very, very particular needs. So for the first 2 years of our partnership, we went with colleagues from Save the Children, and with ethnographers from, into the homes of Syrian refugees and into the homes of Jordanian host community families to really understand how the children in those families are using educational materials and technology in the home for learning. And what we found, you won't be surprised to know, is that kids are accessing their parents' smartphones and spending time on them, typically communicating with friends, on social media, playing video games, not unlike probably many of your kids and my kids. And so we started to wonder, could we actually develop some kind of gaming, mobile gaming solution that would draw kids to spend their time on learning instead of on social media, or in addition to on social media, and something which would make learning fun and really reinforce concepts that they were meant to be learning in school, thereby kind of increasing their confidence and helping to contribute to preventing dropouts from school. So together with Save the Children and with refugee and host community children, which is an important element, we co-created this math game, which is called Space Hero, and which is really designed to strengthen the math skills and the resiliency skills of kids ages 9 to 12 and to make their learning more fun. And this past school year, we integrated that app, it's a gaming app, into a program that Save the Children have, with our input, developed in tandem. The program, therefore, isn't just technology alone, but really integrates teacher training, psychosocial support services, the connection between classrooms and home, and the community. And we piloted that program with the app in 3 schools in Jordan, reaching about 1,300 kids this past year. And we're now going to expand starting next month into 16 schools to reach 8,000 kids. A few different components that I just wanted to highlight. Number one is that kids help design the game, and they continue to help us iterate the game. The second is that kids are introduced to the game in school, but they can play it at home. So outside of that crowded classroom environment that I mentioned. So it's really supplementing skills that they're learning in class. It's not replacing classroom instruction. And then the third thing is that kids don't have to be part of the 16 schools that we're expanding to actually use the game. So it can be downloaded from the Google Play Store. You could download it, though I'll warn you it's in Arabic, so you need to speak Arabic. And it's designed so that it can be self-directed. Kids can use it the way they want to use it, and it progresses along with their capabilities and their learning. It's been downloaded more than 30,000 times, and it averages at this point, before the expansion, around 10,000 users a month. So we're seeing a lot of pickup. I think if I think about the value gain framework that's been presented in the paper and in the guidebook, this is really currently contributing to the indirect and intangible gains kind of piece of that framework. So not only is this partnership aligned with Pearson's values and our principles of reaching more underserved communities and learners and providing access to education, but we're also learning a lot from this partnership about developing learning tools that respond to very unique and specific community needs. Displacement is increasingly a factor of society, a reality of our society. We don't see that issue going away. In fact, we see it growing. And so how is that going to affect education, and how are we going to deliver education given that reality? That matters for us as a company going forward. And so this for us is a really big learning opportunity. And we're using it to engage our product teams and our research teams in the different stages of the partnership. And we're using it to engage future learners, young people. And in that way, we're really adding value to the business in a way that goes beyond reputation and brand, which are intangibles that are important, but really helps us think about designing for the future. And so as we develop and expand, I think we'll find other ways to add value and drive those other value gains. But at the moment, it's really in that intangible space. So Darian, I don't know if that is enough. I look forward
fantastic, Amanda. Thank you very much indeed. Maybe just one other way, I think, within the framework is that the collaborative advantage of engaging sort of a holistic range of actors. And I would suggest that the kids that were part of the design, in essence, they're one of the partners. You know, they're part of this program, and because they are engaged in this way, you have a much more implementable, context-specific program in the end, a product in the end. So I think that sort of user-centric design approach, where your users are part of it, clearly adds this significant additional value.
Absolutely.
Amaya, UNICEF has been partnering with GSMA since 2015. It would be great to hear about the value creation that you are making with that partnership.
Well, thanks so much for having me here. And it was very interesting to hear about the great examples that were just referenced. So just a bit of my background. I work in UNICEF's corporate partnerships team based out of UNICEF's Geneva office, where our private partnerships division is headquartered. As has been mentioned, I'll be focusing on the partnership we have in place with GSMA. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the organization, it's the world's largest industry association representing the interests of more than 750 mobile operators around the world. We have had an MOU in place with GSMA since 2015, which was just recently renewed this year, though our collaboration with the GSMA has started earlier than 2015, though it was formalized then. And really, our focus has been to conduct joint advocacy on promoting children's rights in a digital world. So looking at issues ranging from the eradication of child online sexual abuse to the responsible use of the internet and mobile technology, to thinking about how the internet can be used to promote children's rights to express themselves online, to participate, to access information, and also how mobile technology can enable children's rights to education, to health, to identity, and so forth through SMS and connectivity and all the assets that mobile can provide. So in terms of joint advocacy, this really means that we work together to mobilize companies, so their members, but also the ICT industry more broadly, policymakers and other stakeholders to take action on these risks and opportunities when it comes to children in the digital world. And before I describe some of the specific partnership elements, I just wanted to say a few words about how UNICEF views partnerships with business to put the example into context. Essentially, UNICEF now more than ever sees business as a critical stakeholder in delivering our objectives, and like some of the speakers that came before me, sees business not merely as donors or suppliers, but really as strategic partners with whom we can work together to deliver programming and achieve results for children. And so, and one element of this strategy, it means that we don't just work to develop bilateral partnerships with individual companies, but we also look to engage and enter into partnerships with multi-stakeholder platforms, or what we call aggregators. An aggregator can be anything from a multi-stakeholder initiative, such as the World Economic Forum, to an industry association, such as GSMA, or another industry grouping that's focused on a thematic issue. And really the idea here is that we can work with these platforms really to amplify our agenda amongst a range of different actors, and really work with these partners to do joint advocacy and really catalyze action across multiple entry points. And so this, of course, is really a key benefit of working with GSMA because of its unique ability to reach potentially hundreds of mobile operators rather than UNICEF, working on an individual basis. And then, of course, there are many ways that we can work to partner with companies beyond some of the traditional funding models, as I mentioned. We really look, and this is also where the framework is really aligned with our approach, is we, of course, look at how we can use a company's core assets or technology or systems or practices with which we can really create synergies and create efficiencies in terms of how UNICEF delivers programming. We also look to conduct joint advocacy with companies or platforms that have massive reach or influence, such as the GSMA. And then last but not least, we also work to engage companies and platforms to address some of the potential policy risks that a business or an industry may inherently pose to children's rights. So for example, technology which could be used incorrectly that could potentially pose risks to children. So going back to the GSMA partnership, I think it encompasses many of these aspects and also really aligns with some of the key criteria that TPI's framework outlines. We see tremendous value in carrying out joint advocacy and having a shared agenda with GSMA really to advance children's rights in the digital world with its members. And along these lines, over the last few years, we've developed joint guidance on child online protection or issues such as child online sexual abuse to really offer steps and recommendations for their members and for industry more broadly to adopt and put into place. We've also, over the years, worked with the GSMA to create an enabling environment at the national level. So jointly convening operators, mobile operators, policymakers, civil society to really create and enforce the right types of legislation and build capacity on furthering children's rights in the digital sphere. And we've done this across perhaps 30 countries in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. So really making use of that platform and the ability for both of our organizations to bring different players to the table. UNICEF and GSMA also host a number of major events. So the GSMA hosts the Mobile World Congress, where UNICEF has had a presence in the past and will do so at next year's event, really to amplify some of the key messages and joint advocacy that we're working on together. And then we're also making use of different innovative processes that are being spearheaded by both our organizations. So just to name a couple of examples, GSMA has an initiative called around big data for social good. And so UNICEF collaborates with GSMA on that initiative along with a number of other actors to really create frameworks, concepts, and proof of concept on how big data can be useful, for example, to get ahead of emergencies and deliver important health or nutrition messaging, or to identify where populations are moving and where UNICEF can deliver emergency services. So that's one example then where we collaborate with GSMA to look at how we can use mobile technology and innovation to address some of the issues and challenges that UNICEF faces in terms of its programming. So I think, that's just a quick summary of how we work with the GSMA. And I think many of those examples clearly align with some of the key elements of the TPI framework. Some of them that were mentioned already in terms of combining our diverse resources, thinking, and approaches. So UNICEF really contributing that child rights lens to some of the initiatives and messaging and processes that GSMA is promoting amongst the industry. I mentioned we do national capacity building at the country level, and really this has been super useful in terms of GSMA being able to bring mobile operators to the table, and UNICEF bringing policymakers, government, and other stakeholders to the table to really come up with workable national solutions and action plans on some of the challenges facing children. And then last but not least, working with each other to create legitimacy and build up each other's knowledge bases, us bringing the child rights perspective, of course, and GSMA helping to amplify UNICEF's messaging amongst its constituency, and really building our capacity in terms of some of this technology and how the innovation can be useful for UNICEF programming. And with that, I'll stop there.
Thank you very much indeed for that very clear example. And a couple of things really struck me. One is how many of the different types of value that you are creating with GSMA. And the other thing that struck me was around how, and we had the same thing certainly with Amanda's partnership with Save the Children, how it started off a partnership doing one thing, and then very much sort of moved to delivering multiple different approaches, multiple different ways of creating value, because you built up the quality of the relationship, you knew that you were working well together, and so you were able to find these new ways to create value, even more value for you and even more value for them, and deliver more effectively together. So I think that's interesting how these relationships advance and become more mature. One of the other things that I think is very interesting about what you said is this business of money not transferring hands. So often, I would say in the past, we've seen this so much sort of from the NGO side and perhaps also from the UN side, where partnering with business has been, a lot of it has been around revenue generation or resource mobilization, and we're seeing much more sophistication coming from a number of UN agencies and NGOs, seeing that mission value to being just as important, or in fact, in your case, the only important area in this sort of collaboration. And what the reason for developing these tools is to really help organizations understand that value that they're getting, certainly beyond the traditional sort of financial gain that one might get. One of the questions in the group chat, we've had people talking about partnering with the public sector, partnering with governments, and I'm wondering if any of you would be able to talk a little bit about that, about the sort of particular value creation that comes from working with governments. Of course, all three of you have been working with them. Maybe Ian, just because we haven't heard from you for a while, would you be able to talk a little bit about the specific case of partnering with the public sector?
Yes, very briefly. So certainly in the Southern Africa examples that we were sharing, we found this kind of approach help, and certainly the review mechanisms being absolutely critical. And then in terms of the creating value, I think an example from Mongolia is interesting, very relevant to the GSMA around child helplines, where that was a classic three-sector collaboration between government and the business mobile provider and World Vision and other NGOs. And that really fit well with bringing essential resources. I think one of the key things was the holistic range of actors that allowed community engagement, that allowed access of the helpline to children. It started requiring payments, and the partnership was restricted access to children, and using different actors it was able to change to be able to be much more accessible to the children who might use that helpline. And so I think, yes, it feels very much that this framework is very helpful for such a partnership. And obviously collaboration with government is a whole other topic, but I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you for giving us that example. I'm just going to go through a couple of other things that come up in the chat. Somebody's asked about the question of how do we apply these partnership concepts to existing buyer-supplier relationships so that they too can work together more effectively and contribute towards achieving the SDGs within supply chains. I don't know, Amanda, if you have any thoughts on that, about getting existing supplier-buyer relationships and trying to build in some collaboration towards the SDGs?
Yes, I'm sure I'm happy to provide a quick perspective on that. I might also just say something about the previous question about how to work with governments, particularly in the Middle East around the refugee crisis. We can't work or partner or do initiatives without the buy-in from governments. And so particularly in our partnership with Save the Children, I mean, we are in public schools, and the Ministry of Education needs to approve our presence in those schools and even identify the schools that we should be in. And so I would just say it's absolutely critical to engage governments early on, particularly in the work that we are doing, and keep them engaged in the conversation throughout, because I think this is about how can we make systems work better in the countries where, in the country where we're operating at the moment. And so in order to do that, we really need to work with the folks who created and managed the system to understand their challenges and how we can support them to address them. And so that's been a really critical aspect. It can add time to the partnership. We have had to go back and forth on several occasions with government representatives. There have been changing administrations that we've dealt with. We've had to wait for approvals, but actually the delays that we may have faced early on are probably preventing further delay as we start to scale and gain momentum. So that's been really important for us. On the supply chain issue, absolutely there are opportunities to form partnerships between suppliers, buyers around the SDGs, particularly when we look at our entire supply chain, where we're spending the most money as a company and where the highest risks are. Our first priority is to make sure we're managing those risks appropriately, but then we look at where are there real opportunities to create value around certain aspects of the SDGs, whether that's access to education, in our case, that's often the case, or creating more relationships with women-owned businesses to promote economic empowerment for women. So we do look at those opportunities, but we also make sure that we're very, very, we've first of all got our ducks in a row in terms of managing our highest priority risks before we move into that partnership creation piece.
Great. So yes, the opportunities are there. Value can certainly be created, or significantly more value can be created in these supply chains. Uwe, I wonder whether I could ask you one of the other questions that's come up, which is the challenge about these partnerships just taking so long, and the management of them taking so long. Do you see, or have you had experiences of being able to somehow speed that process up? Do you see these types of tools that focus very quickly on the potential for creating value together? Do you think that they could be helpful in terms of that speeding up that process of partnering?
Yeah, no, thanks. I think it's a good point. And maybe the GSMA example I gave is good in that context. I mean, for us on the UNICEF side, it starts out obviously with a clear assessment of where are gaps of partnerships we have. And for me, specifically on the multi-stakeholder platform side, the GSMA example was good because, I mean, the mutual interest, and that's the shared value again, right? I mean, on child protection, which is a key risk mitigation aspect for GSMA and is a key component of UNICEF's mandate, obviously, that's a good starting point. So for us, I mean, starting small in a sense and then grow it from there, but starting small with something that is has this clear added value, shared value for both sides is helpful to get something quicker off the ground, because there is not necessarily an urgency, but there is a strategic interest on both sides to move on some of these areas, because it is key for both sides of the business in a sense, if you talk from a private sector perspective. So for me, that's one aspect, that if you set your ambitions right and you have identified this delta P of added value, I think that's one aspect to be quicker on these things and don't start with the most ambitious goals. And I mean, this is a long-standing partnership with GSMA, and it has taken years to evolve, but starting at these very, very specific topics where they can add a value, they have a specific relevance for UNICEF, and we can add value with our thinking and expertise in these areas. I think that's one area to make sure it doesn't take a long time to get things off the ground.
So start with something small and manageable, not too ambitious, to get things going, and then build up from there once you've built up that relationship and ways of working effectively together, perhaps.
Yeah, once you have the traction, yes.
We have some more questions, and Ian, if I can sort of bring you into this discussion as well. One of the questions is, in terms of sort of the experience of collaborative advantage, about kind of an asymmetry between partners when it comes to understanding what the collaborative advantage might be. Have either of you had a chance to use this sort of framework or any sort of approach, a sort of more systematic approach to collectively identifying the collaborative advantage and the value gain for both partners and together?
So you were asking about the asymmetry and the understanding of the collaborative advantage, and I think obviously it's kind of early days. We've only had this written down for weeks rather than months, and one of the things that we found is that it's very helpful to essentially take that framework and begin to discuss with a partner exactly what we might be doing together. And I think of one example where in one of our field offices, we've been working with an organisation. It had primarily been a contracting relationship with a national civil society organisation, and they were saying, look, we want to grow, we want to expand, we still want to work with you. They were doing some really good things. And so by giving this to essentially the negotiating team, they were able to go together and look across, prepare for their meeting first about what exactly are the things that we could do, which is going to add value. And I think that was primarily that they looked around the mission benefit, because this was with a fellow civil society organisation, so strong alignment around mission benefit. So they were able to plan what they might be looking at. They were looking at greater reach, about legitimacy, about learning. And then they were able to take that very transparently to the negotiation. And essentially that worked very well, because I think there was more shared understanding about what was being negotiated at the time. So this, I think one of the advantages of this tool is that it should be very symmetrical, very equitable, that everybody can look at what is happening. And then at the front end, of course, I'd always recommend that everybody does that organizational benefit tool as well. And so, okay, we live in the real world. We're not all perfect all the time to each other, but the more that we're able to be very explicit about why we want to be in this partnership, the value for our organization, as well as the nice things, is always good, and we're trying to model that as well.
So by providing this framework, it gives you something clearly, something to talk around, to give you the prompts for the conversation, to be able to attempt to find those sweet spots where the greatest value can be created. It sounds like.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So we have another question about, which is an interesting one. It's about measuring the impact of the partnership. Are there concrete measurable indicators? And we see this question quite a lot about indicators for partnership and one of the challenges that we see is that, or at least in the past, before this collaborative advantage model, is that actually if you think of partnerships as a program, a project to deliver something, then of course you would have in place the measures of what success is for that collaboration and partnership, in the same way that you would have them for any project. What we're trying to do with this collaborative advantage model is to provide a way in which partners can focus on what is the additional value that the partnership can bring, to be able to in some way then measure it, or to be able to have indicators for success of the partnership defined by, we are able to achieve more than we could have done on our own. Ian or Amaya, do you have examples when it comes to the measurement of the value creation of the partnership that's in some way sort of different to your standard measurement of impact from a project?
Yes, so I'm just looking at the excellent questions in the chat there around this. So Sarita saying, how are we actually measuring the impact of the partnership? Are there concrete measurable indicators? And then Lucy asking about the partnership principles. So Darian, I think you're pointing first to about the impact and measurable indicators. So yes, absolutely. I think the way that I look at this and the thinking behind it is, if you think of kind of a theory of action, then the collaborative advantage tells you about how you are going to work. And so with that example of the police in Lesotho, you could very easily begin to put that into a plan about how you might want to see some of the learning and capacity changes, and that should go into whatever kind of planning and indicators that you use depending on, of course, one of the things with cross-sector partnerships is we use all kinds of different measuring frameworks, so making sure that it's in the shared measuring framework. So that can be measured, and that then helps us because now we can begin to attribute the change that we would expect to see to the partnership way of working. And so, yes, so in that planning, as we look at the benefits and changes to the organisations and then to the outcomes for the target groups, then all of that can then go into the plan. And that, yes, there's no reason that should not then be concrete, because you can predict what change you expect to see happen, and then you can go and measure it. And then, Lucy, you say the review tool doesn't look at partnership principles. Yes, you're absolutely right. And I think this is probably, of the three partnering principles, this is probably mostly around mutual benefit, but recognizing that as well as mutual benefit, the benefit to each organization, we also want to see the maximum difference to the social problem that we are addressing. And so we want to have a both and so in the kind of partnership performance and health checks that we're looking at, we are recommending that these are embedded.
So this is just one part of an overall review of the partnership to ensure that this really is delivering value and delivering additional value. Because the costs of partnership, as we know, can be quite high. And in fact, Amaya, can I ask you, we're talking about the benefits of these collaborations, but actually, do you also measure the costs involved? Do you have something that clearly measures the amount of time and effort and staff time and money or whatever it is that you put into this collaboration, and sort of measure also the benefits coming out? How do you do that sort of measurement?
So that's a great question. In terms of the indicators, that's something that we always try to clearly define when entering into a partnership. Is what type of impact do we want, and what are the outcomes or indicators that would then feed into that. And so, for a partnership with GSMA or with the mobile sector, that could be anything from how many companies are taking action or putting in place the right policies, to how many are putting in child helplines and how many children are making use of that helpline. In terms of, and so those are things that are perhaps clearly measurable, though the overall impact is oftentimes hard to define. And in terms of your question on costs, that isn't something, to be honest, that we systematically do when we enter these corporate partnerships, and it's likely something that we will have to think about in the future, and is also one of the reasons why, as I mentioned, we are looking at working with aggregators or platforms to help eliminate some of those costs and achieve results at scale by working with catalyzers, if you will, so that we don't have to put in the same level of investment for individual companies that could be reached effectively through a platform.
So in essence, that platform gives you this is partly about scale, because you talked about earlier about working with GSMA to be able to reach multiple different companies, multiple different mobile phone operators, but also one of the collaborative advantages, number 10, is about the sort of the networking, the connecting, the building relationships. And so working with these platforms then enables you to access multiple organizations at once. You also mentioned about what sounded, when you talked about sort of the risks, and I think sort of on the internet side, almost as if one of the other collaborative advantages is around this creation of sort of norms and standards, trying to sort of shift an entire industry, which of course can have massive impact
right.
through that collaboration.
Exactly. So that's one of the key elements of the way in which UNICEF engages with the corporate sector, is to look at some of the inherent risks that a company's core business or an industry may inadvertently pose on children's rights, and really to define what some of those actions companies should be taking should be. But that's really one core model of the way in which UNICEF engages with business. And then certainly working with industry associations or industry bodies can help push that type of change and create that type of standard setting that UNICEF wouldn't necessarily be able to do on our own.
Wonderful. Well, we've come to the end of the hour, and I would just like to thank very much indeed our 3 participants on the panel, as well as everybody else who has been participating in the webinar. Thank you all very much for your questions and thoughts. And just to leave you with the guidebook that we have created, it is still a working version. We are still open for any comments, thoughts, suggestions, particularly if there are any areas of the 10 different collaborative advantages or any of the other additional delta Ps that might be missing. Please do let us know, or any other comments or thoughts or suggestions on the guidebook. Thank you all again very much indeed, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.